All right, Kasia and Weiss, thanks so much for joining the Wall Street Oasis podcast.
Hi, Patrick. Nice to meet you, and we're very excited to speak to you today.
So it'd be great if we could start off. Maybe Kasia, you could give us a quick summary bio, just high level, what you've done in the past, and then Weiss, I'd love you to follow that up.
Yeah, sure. So my name is Kasia 𝗪𝗧𝗧. I am originally from Poland. Currently, I live in London. But if I take you a little bit back, so I was a professional tennis player. When the journey ended, I moved to the States. I graduated from UC Berkeley, and then right after that, I went into investment banking. I've always worked in London across small, medium to large banks like Jefferies, HSBC, Livingstone Partners, which was then acquired by Rothschild. Always front office, covering healthcare and consumer team. After 5-6 years of that, I transitioned into opening my actually own business with a few other bankers. One of them was actually my husband now, who is also now managing director at Morgan Stanley. So it seems like bankers and finance people keep surrounding me. So after 3 years or so, we did very well. But as you can imagine, being an entrepreneur takes a little bit of more than just the one thing. Is a lot of capital involved, but it went great. And after that, I actually transitioned into VC. I was there for about 2 years, investing in early stage consumer tech companies, seed, pre-seed. And then I opened my own business, which is coaching. A lot of my clients are in finance. And together with Weiss, which we'll talk a little bit later, we launching a new program that will reflect my personal journey as well as journey of my clients in the financial world, and hopefully that can help them to assimilate better.
Yeah, wallstreetei.com. That's the first plug. We'll throw it in there right at the start, so if you guys want to check it out while you're listening to this. Okay, so real quick, you were a tennis player. What was your highest rank in the world?
So doubles 400 and singles 700.
Wow. Very impressive. Okay. I would not get on the court with you. Okay. So, okay, great. So, very interesting path. When you said you were in banking, was it mostly a specific group at health? I think you were healthcare, right? Healthcare. And then.
Yeah. I started in healthcare, Jefferies, and then I moved to Livingstone Partners, which right now is Rothschild, and I was more of a generalist. And then I moved to HSBC, and I was covering consumer space.
Very cool. All right, Weiss, you're up. What's your summary?
Yeah, thank you, Patrick. And first of all, thank you for having us on. I'm also a mentor. I'm privileged to be a mentor for WSO. So I think you do some great work here with great content, and you're really helping a lot of people along their journey into the industry. So thank you for that. My background really quickly. I was 25 years in the industry, mostly at JP Morgan, 15 years there, 5 years at Morgan Stanley, a year at Goldman Sachs, and a couple of years at Barclays Capital. I think for me, the journey was a little different than Kasia's. Also, my background, I'm from Afghanistan. I was born and raised here, but we moved here when we moved back to New York when I was 9. And once I sort of gained my footing, went through school, went to Boston University, studied finance. And I said, hey, what's the logical step is to get into the industry, which I did. And after 25 years, I think my journey was different in that I was able to go through back office, front office, middle office, technology, HR. So I've covered the gamut, and I sort of know the inner workings of the industry. And I think I really wanted to leverage that knowledge to help others, just given that background, to assimilate more seamlessly. And then I did start my own consulting company as well recently. So, and now this partnership with Kasia with Wall Street AI.
Awesome. And so your background is really interesting because you are at some large bulge bracket banks like the JPs of the world and the Goldmans and the Morgan Stanley, right? So you had like everything from back office, like you said, all the way through, prime brokerage, right? So you were in a lot of different groups. So I think your perspective is really interesting because you've seen the inner workings of how the divisions and the offices interplay with one another, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. I think when we think about banking, there's such a wide scope. There's so many opportunities, and sometimes we make that knee-jerk reaction of automatically going into investment banking or It's just one of those, things that it just sounds so appealing and it's so glamorous. But once you're in the industry, there's so many opportunities. And I think if you know your temperament, kind of yourself as a person, and if you can handle certain environments, there are some environments that are catered to other people, and that sometimes people end up in the wrong part of the bank, and that's kind of what I've learned over the years. But I think we're doing some good things now, and I'm really excited about this new venture, and I think we can really help a lot of people.
Yeah, and usually, and for the listeners out there, usually we, in these podcasts, I dive super deep into the backgrounds of the guests to try and, uncover hidden wisdom. Out of the 250 plus different podcasts we've done, usually the secret is networking. Usually the secret is, hey, the big break came because I knew this person or I had this conversation and suddenly I was in this interview and it gave me my big break. But I think I'd rather spend the time we have today diving a little bit into some of the stuff that is less often discussed around mindset, around leadership, around emotional intelligence, the whole point of what you've launched and the reason why you think there's a gap in the market, and kind of dive into that a little bit and really kind of push, thinking, hey, is there really a gap? And, why, what have you seen around burnout, around that's because I think that's more interesting. So let's just start talking about, what you've seen in trends in terms of like, okay, so when I was in banking back in early 2000s, I was working 90 hours a week. I was sleep deprived. I was struggling. I came from a liberal arts background, didn't have the finance background. So it was absolutely brutal for me. I know there's a lot of kids still feeling that way, coming into the industry. So I'd love to hear, what you think in terms of like, has the industry changed at all? There was a few things with like protected weekends. Has it not gone far enough? I'd love to just hear that to start. And I know I had a lot of questions in there.
Cool. Maybe I'll start first. So if I think back, whenever I started my career in banking, I graduated from what I consider prestigious university with very high GPA, and I was really trying my best to get into banking. And it's already very difficult because even if you're in a very good school, it's still competitive. And then you go through all these rounds of interviews, and it is very stressful, demanding, and there is a lot of expectations that you put on yourself, as well as your parents, your peers, and then once you get a chance to interview, you go through that, and then let's say you land an offer and you're like really happy, and at least my experience was like, well, I've made it. And I was so proud of myself. You graduate and you get a job. It's like you feel like you're on top of the world. Mm-hmm. And then, at least my experience straight into investment banking, I remember I worked at Jefferies, and it was an amazing team. I met my husband there, which, it's quite funny, but I worked 90 to 120 hours a week, and I didn't have one day off for 6 months. And it's nothing to brag about, but it is the industry standard, or certain teams, it's still the reality, and it was hard. So one thing, what I would say, that I thought that my school, and more than that, my athletic background prepared me mentally to face all these challenges that no one really talks about in school. Mm-hmm. But I think when you go in and you kind of expect something like that, and or get more insights and understanding of how to prepare for that, and it's very difficult to prepare for this. Mm. But in my opinion, sticking in investment banking for more than a year, 2 or 3, was crucial to actually start seeing the result, the payoff. And it's like similarly in professional training, when you're an athlete, like you just have to keep your head down and do the work without seeing the immediate results. So that is, to me, and technical skills, what you, Patrick, do is extremely important, because school prepares kids to a certain degree, mm-hmm. but then there's a technical part where a lot of times you don't really get to, you don't get to be trained on properly as you would need it to actually perform at work. But then I think the crucial element that, hopefully we can fill that void, is the mental preparation and the mental support that you need through this first 1 to 3 years when you get into banking. That is very competitive environment, and it's very stressful. And I think the mindset in conjunction with technical skills is something for people that make it or break it. And I've seen it with myself where I struggled, whether there were technical parts or mindset. And then I've seen it also through my friends, my husband, and a lot of friends throughout the industry. And now, even more recently, maybe I thought, things change, but still 80% of my clients are from the investment banking world, and things have not changed. And I have a feeling like they even got harder. I think, there are more options right now. They might just look to the side. They might be distracted by a woman in a red dress. So it's like, oh, maybe I go to private equity, or maybe I go to work for corporate. So if, hours are long, it's hard. And it doesn't seem like it's changing much, even with protective weekends. So how do you actually, develop this mindset and get the proper support to get you to this? In my opinion, the hardest 3 years of banking are the first 3 of, analysts getting to associate and kind of sticking your head above the water, having some support from interns and analysts, and also, I think, experiencing a little bit more interesting part of banking as an associate and VP and so on.
Yeah, for sure. I think I remember my analyst days, I remember like the second all-nighter once, and it was a second day of a weekend, and I thought I was going to get to go home. And I remember thinking there, like, I had worked at very tough schools, high GPA to athlete. And now I remember thinking like, oh my gosh, this is just brutal. Like I remember like almost cracking and kind of like almost thinking to myself, like, what? Like I was sleep deprived. I was exhausted. Like, and then I felt myself like almost like panic, like not a full on panic attack or anything like that, but like almost like, whoa, I could feel like the emotion surging, and like I'd never felt that.
Yeah.
So it was weird. It was like, whoa, like, are you reaching like a breaking point of some sort that you didn't think, like, I didn't think it was 90. I thought it was much higher than that, right? Where I could, but it was just weird. I think I hadn't eaten in 18 hours or something, and it was just like, it started messing with your brain. Okay, so that's really interesting. I mean, Weiss, what about you? What did you feel like when you went in, did you experience something similar, or did it more gradually ramp for you?
I think it just gradually ramped for me. I think once I ascended into leadership positions, I think in the last 15 years, mostly I was in leadership positions, and I was responsible for quite a bit of people.
Yeah.
And I want to add a little bit of a different perspective in that, what I noticed is, and what's happening in our world, let's face it, our world has evolved tremendously, right? Post-COVID, just the political landscape, geopolitical landscape, all those things, who's taking what side, all those things. Now, if you look at it in the context of the corporate world, in terms of, what kind of environment do we all come into, right out of school, 1 year, 2 years, 3 years in? Guess what? Those that are in leadership seats, whether you're in the IB or any other part of the bank, you're now generationally, you've gone past that. You're in my age bracket or someone else's. And as the younger generation comes in, what I noticed, especially the last 5, 6, 7 years, is that gap in terms of connecting with the individual that came in, the student that just came, the graduate that just came in, it's just, there's that disconnect, right? So culturally, the foundation makes it really difficult for those coming into industry to assimilate effectively. And, that's what we're offering here with Wall Street EI, is to really soften that landing, so to speak. But also from a leadership perspective, when I was at JP Morgan in 2020, I created a leadership program. And a quick story, and it was called ACE, Approach, Culture, Excellence. Get the approach right, you're going to create an optimal culture, which should lead to excellence in terms of performance. And that's something I did on a side while I was in the prime brokerage space leading a team. I worked on that, presented that to Jamie Dimon. I got it to that level. And my message to Mr. Dimon was that I think that we are missing a key component of leadership, which will impact the employees. And that is, it's centered around, are we teaching emotional intelligence in the development of that? Because it affects you in every aspect of, not only in your work, but in life. So you guys just talked about all the hours you faced, and that's adversity. It plays on your mind. It tests your will and your mettle. And so what do we do to actually teach that? So what about when there's managers that you don't agree with? Guess what? 80%, 90% of the time, everyone who's going to enter the industry is not going to get along with their manager. And for the reasons that I just said, is because there's a major generational gap. And guess what? Those people that have been in the industry for a lot, they don't feel sorry they don't want to adjust to you. They want you to adjust to them. Right. So the wider the gap, the larger the disconnect. And so that's what I noticed. And I think that program that I created sort of inspired me to leave the industry and do something on a larger scale. And I think what Kasia and I have created really helps hone in on those points that I just mentioned, that will really give everyone a blueprint on what the realities of the industry are, whether it's long hours or tough managers, or, networking is so key. I mean, there's so many different topics we're covering, but that's, I think my journey led me to this point, and especially those last couple of years at JP Morgan, when I was trying to really impact culture in the industry, and now I'm doing it from the outside.
There was an interesting article, I think like 10 years ago, showing the average tenure of a first-year analyst in investment banking, and how it's trended from like the 80s all the way to, whatever, 2000 back then, when the article, 2010, 12, whatever, or 14. And point being, every single year, it's slightly shorter and shorter and shorter. So there's a lot more burnout. There's a lot more people hopping to private equity or just to get out to corporate development, corporate M&A. And so banks, I think, have recognized that this is a problem. I think famously a couple of years ago, they called it the Goldman 13, wrote a thing about how like culturally things had gone way south, and their mental health was in the gutter. Everything had really gotten much worse. But basically the response from the banks, from what we saw, wasn't more the, hey, we're going to enforce protected weekends. It was just throw money at the problem. And so it ended up in in pretty dramatic pay raises across the board, at least on the base salary, from, I think it was like at the time 90,000 base. It got all the way up to like 110 to 130 in 1 year. And so that was really interesting. Wall Street Oasis, we ended up kind of releasing more of a kind of a survey and a report that kind of dove into that, what the actual culture and what it was like at these banks. And we saw the same thing. We saw pretty dramatic drops across the board. So it didn't seem like the pay increase helped so much. So I'm wondering, do you think eventually, what are the banks going to do? Because now I think that a lot of the private equity firms are going straight at, they're not even waiting for the banks now to hire and train up their students. They're going straight for the undergrads now. A lot more of the mega funds are doing that. So the banks are not competing side by side for them. What do you think is the bank's next move to try and get great talent?
I think that's the problem. I don't think they really have a proper plan. At least I haven't seen much. They still try to, like you say, they sort of respond to it is just increase the pay, right? And I think we get into the point, and also this generation is, in my opinion, less driven by money per se. Mm-hmm. So I think they're throwing money at the problem, but it's just, maybe our parents' generation will respond to it much better if the the price, if the pay increases. But right now there's just, people want to be surrounded by even nicer offices. When you look at our offices in banks, they're still cubicles, gray. And then you think about going to like Uber or Google or all these places where it's just, the environment is very different and people still work very hard there. So then you just look on the other side and just wonder, well, what's wrong with this industry? Why do I have to, be surrounded by that type of environment and nothing seemed to be changing? And I think there's all the way sort of the Wall Street that is trying to keep that sort of rigid, traditional way of doing things. And you have young people coming in and trying to disturb it. And I think it's just a big clash and something we'll have to give. And just the question, who's going to actually adjust to it, quicker and better. But I personally I just don't see much change. And people on top have not been taught how to be proper leaders because no one ever invested in them. And I can see with my clients who are very senior, I think they want the change, but they've never been taught how to do it. So if they've not been taught how to do it and they don't get the proper resources to learn how to do it, we're just asking them to do something that's quite impossible. And on top of it, they have their own P&Ls, they have their own things to report through.
I think that's the issue. They have their own P&Ls that they have their own P&Ls, they have their own stress, their own things. So they are very hyper focused on it's, it's me. So what's my problem? So I'm not going to, it's everyone else abusing the junior resources. It's not me. I only sometimes when I really need it.
Agree. I totally agree with you guys. And one thing I noticed in my last couple of years at JP Morgan, I got to travel around the different locations. There's multiple locations, obviously. Yeah. they're trying to Googleize it and try to, like, in terms of like the office space.
Oh, they are. Okay, so they're
like,
putting like massage chairs in now and sleeping notes and everything, or what?
There are rooms where you can go, and there's one called the jungle room, where they really set up a nice little environment where you can just get quiet and the noises and the waterfall sounds, and you can just kind of go in and meditate.
Okay.
But the point is that they're trying to modernize in terms of their space. So aesthetically, they were trying to replicate what's going on in the tech industry, for example, to hopefully attract talent and the younger talent to say, "Oh, look, we now have these fancy offices with these little pods that we can go work in," and those things. That was all. It's just pure. It didn't really have an impact from what I could tell. I think to Kasha's point, it starts with leadership and the culture. And the culture, it's ingrained in our culture it's the client profits, quarterly earnings, right? And by the way, quarterly earnings are so, subjective. I don't even know who came up with that measure, right? So if you look at the longer game, I think you'll be doing a lot better. But I think if we really focus on, at this point, it is what it is. And what the banks could do, like Takasha's point, is focus on how we train our leaders and how we equip them. And that's something else I'm working on as part of my consulting program. Yeah. But I think, emotional intelligence, like I said, it drives everything. And if you prepare yourself as coming into the industry, getting a good foot in the door and really using, you can use it to your advantage. And the technical skills, obviously, you got to get that. But this will give these skills will give you that little advantage. And I think my experience with Mr. Diamond, just having that dialogue a little bit, it gave me a sense that that the acknowledgement was there that we needed to do something different, right? But then I haven't seen that sort of pan out in terms of it actually playing out in the industry. So I think the need is there, and we'll see. We'll see what happens. But certainly, Kasha and I are trying to do our part. I know you're certainly trying to do your part. So let's see where it goes.
Yeah, and I think something that's interesting is just going back to like the staffer, like the role of the staffer. I always find this a really interesting, and they always make a banker the staffer, right? So it's almost always like an associate or VP, right? Where they're kind of in the midst of trying to get promoted themselves. There's a lot of conflict of interest of, if they were to say, hey, this really valuable junior that's very efficient and works really hard, you know what, they don't have time for you anymore. It's almost like they're telling that to MDs, people who are senior to them. No, you can't have this resource. I think it's a very tough position to be put in. You're trying to almost like in any analyst class, in any associate class, you're going to have the people that maybe have a slightly stronger work ethic. Maybe they came in with better skills. They're going to be just more efficient, right? I think what ends up happening is, especially at certain organizations, I've heard more than others, because maybe they hold on to people longer, or they just don't know how to train them properly. You end up having like 20% of the class taking on 80% of like the live deal work and the really the fire drills and all that stuff. So you almost end up burning out your best people. Any thoughts on just what they could do? Like, I know it's hey, the leaders need more emotional intelligence to be able to recognize these things, but like, is there anything like simple that they could do besides like, I want to give my leaders emotional intelligence training? Like, and then what?
I think, I think what you mentioned earlier in terms of like everything is driven towards P&L and where are we this quarter and all that. Yeah. Human capital is underestimated, right? The optimization of human capital. How much money, how much resources are all these big banks and just corporations in general spending on technology, right? With AI, the advent of AI and all its impact. Yeah. But I think the focus that we don't give is the human capital optimization. And I saw it firsthand that we're probably getting, yes, those 20% that you mentioned are getting a brunt of the work, especially the grunt work, right? Yeah. And that's not appealing to those people, right? And because they have so much more to offer. There's so much more to offer. So it's because of the whole hierarchy. And that's just the way these banks are set up and these organizations are set up. But if we can focus a little bit more on distributing, I think middle managers also kind of face a little bit of a challenge because they're sort of caught in the middle. And that's a whole other story. But the point is that I think sometimes the hierarchy gets in the way. When you reach a certain level, it's like, it's as if you've done your time. I don't want to do that work anymore. Let me pass it on to that. Let these next people kind of get the brunt of the work, because that's what I did, right? But that's the whole point. That's not going to work anymore. That doesn't fly anymore in today's world. So I think, and because of that, we're getting about 60, it's hard to quantify, but I would say we're getting 50 to 60 to 70% abilities, the talent of anyone coming in now junior, and that you're missing out on their full potential. And that speaks to leadership and trying to perhaps maybe look at hierarchy and promote the person who actually brings ideas to the table, whether or not they're second year, third year, first year, right? But that's just not the way industry tech works that way. I spent some time at the headquarters in Google, and I was able to, my friend works there, and I was able to sit in on a team meeting, and I saw the way they operate. The young people had the ideas, and they were given a voice, and they were able to put it on their whiteboard. And ultimately, I'm sure they were able to implement some of that. So I think it's just a mindset in terms of leadership, and cultural shift has to take place. And so there's a lot of work to be done. But I think hierarchy is sort of the issue here. And we need to have more of a flat organization, I think, to really get the most out of our people.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is what Y said. And I remember from my days, it was usually, if you were a good analyst, you would be much more likely to be staffed on live deals. And if you were not so good, then you'll be just doing, strip line profiles, updating comps and all that stuff. But I think you are as strong as your weakest sort of team members. So if you play your quarterback too often, right, and it's going to burn out, but then equally, if you don't play the backup quarterbacks, every now and then, they also going to get bad. So you're pushing the good ones, and then you're not letting the others sort of get on live deals. So it is a bit of a problem of, on top, usually the MD is like, oh, I want to have this and this guy on a live deal. And you generally, if you are not that great, let's say, at modeling, the reality is that you getting staffed on a live deal is going to be slim to none, unless they just don't, unless they don't have anybody to pick from the good ones. You're going to be the next one in line. It is the brutal truth. And I think, how you change it, perhaps there should be just rotation, right? Or maybe program where it just assign, maybe AI at some point can be more sort of random in assigning it, and assigning, the team or how it will be structured. But as it is right now, it's very much the MD would have a request. Hey, I want to work with Jessica or John because they are the best. If they are not that great, they're going to go to their second best. And so it is the technical skills, the communication, the soft skills that you have are very important for the MD, because obviously they want the job to be done properly. Is it fair? Absolutely not. But that's the reality. And like Y said, is there needs to be a fundamental change on top. But equally, the MDs have the pressure from above them. And if they don't deliver, it's a chain of reaction that everyone, will suffer. So it's, it's easier said than done, but perhaps also the pressure on top people have to kind of loosen up a little bit, so they have room to play with their staff to allow them to fail every now and then, so they can learn.
Yeah, and the other thing I've seen, great points, Kasha. The other thing I've seen is that, your personality as you come into the industry, everyone's different, obviously. And so whoever's responsible for those people has to understand those people at an individual level. If you're coming in and you're somewhat reserved and quiet, but you're super capable, and you're very proficient in your technical skill, but it's about playing the game. This is what we're teaching, and also at Wall Street AI. It's a game. It's a competition. When you come in, you could have a 4.0 from Duke or Michigan or wherever, and come in and get hired because of that. But are you going to survive and thrive just because of that? And you'll get in the job, you'll get the door. You'll get in the door and get the job. But then it becomes, well, what are the intangibles that you bring to the table? How do you play that political game? And that's the thing with leadership, is that they'll recognize the person that's has the aptitude to be able to communicate in a certain way, or present themselves in a certain way. They may not have the proficiency from a technical perspective as the person who's more reserved, and unfortunately those people fall behind. So I think, it is, you're sort of, it's a delicate balance. But I think, let's face it, right now, the leaders probably don't have the wherewithal to be able to identify who's got what kind of talents, because they don't have the time to invest in getting to know the people. And so it's incumbent on those coming in to arm themselves with all those sort of development of the intangibles, which is what what 𝗪𝗀 and I are trying to do, so that they can get that competitive advantage.
Yeah, and there's a lot of things I think that are to be coached as, let's say, an incoming analyst. I think there are certain things that can, with going in with eyes wide open does help. So, for example, one of the modules you have on your set here is mastering the performance review. I think for a student that's 22 years old coming straight into the world of full-time work, this is probably what I would say one of the most intimidating aspects of their job. It's like you have to suddenly go in and you're given a review of how you're doing on your work, how you prepare for that meeting. I'd love to just let's dive into that for just a few minutes. What are some tips that you'd give students that are starting in banking, whether it's summer internships or full-time, that they can kind of go into these performance reviews, not look overly defensive if there's criticism, any thoughts on that?
𝗪𝗀, you want to take that?
I think, sure. So I'll just, I think it's just having a point of contact with your line manager much more frequently than when he or she calls you to the office. It's if you can be close to your line manager and actually ask for consistent feedback, I think there'll be much less surprises. And I think even for what we provide,
does that mean like every week, every 2 weeks? What would you say is a good?
I mean, I think having at least once a month, like a proper sit down, it's sufficient enough. People are busy, but if you have certain assignment to do, like I don't know, every today or tomorrow, you can always just ask, hey, how was it? Any feedback? Like really quickly. It doesn't have to be that official, but I think that once a month sit down with your line manager for 15 minutes when you come prepared, I think you don't really need more than that. Mm-hmm. But I remember no one told me that. First of all, no one told me that this is necessary. And like you asking me the questions, should it be every 2 weeks or 3 weeks? Like just do it once a month. I don't think there is a magic number, but frequently enough. So when you have 12 months sort of where you're working towards something, and 12 times you sit with someone, you would actually get a proper, feedback on a consistent basis, not to be surprised by end year review and your bonus. And you can also ask, look, how would you rank me today? Would I be ranked top, middle? So you have, and I've seen, even I was so many times surprised where I will get either ranked higher or lower because I never got that feedback. Yeah. But if you can actually ask direct questions, without, what would you rank me today? But based on my performance today, up to date, where would you rank me? And then ask questions, what can I do to improve it? Yeah. Then I think you can get actually very direct, suggestions, recommendations, instead of, do you see me as, am I going to be ranked number one? And it's not only about your line managers, about other people that you work closely with, other teams and so on. So if you have sit down with your line manager once a month, but imagine if you can sit with 2 or 3 other team members. If you are sort of M&A, you can sit with DCM or ECM and all these people and ask them. Then it ends up being 3 meetings per month. That's already a lot of feedback from across different teams. So then you have something to work with. And the same when you're an athlete, like you just go to the gym, and if all the weights didn't have the how much they weigh, and you just lift them, you wouldn't know if you're getting better or worse. So if you can actually track it, and every single month you see it's improving, or it's not improving. If it's not improving, then at least you know where to spend time. Yeah. But if you don't ask, you won't know. And I've made this mistake. And I think, maybe I was the only one, but I have a feeling like everyone was making this mistake, or most of the people were just too shy to ask. They didn't know that something like this is even possible.
Or who to ask, though, 𝗪𝗀, too. It's like line manager. Well, what does that mean? And as an analyst, is that the VP that you worked on one deal with, right? I think it's probably not your direct. Maybe it is your direct person. Like maybe if you're an analyst and the associate you're working really closely with, maybe that's the person you speak with, because they're the one that's going to be like, telling the superiors. Like,
if you analyze sure, maybe don't go to MD because anyways, associate will probably pass the recommendations going, going forward. But at least with associate,
What if you have a toxic associate? What if the associate's just miserable?
Well, I think.
Well, I can address that.
Sure.
I think. Listen, ultimately, it's quite simple. To be honest with you, if you document your work, right, and this is where we all fall. A lot of us fall short. Documenting your work, your accomplishments. They give you the HR portal is where you should use the HR portal and use the objectives that you set that are they're formal objectives that are set. And then a lot of people don't add their own objectives, right? So you should be allowed to do both. And then once you set them, and as you move towards your performance review, there's going to be 2 performance reviews, mid-year and an end of year, right? As long as you, then when you have those, whether it's biweekly or monthly meeting, as long as you can then point to the objectives, your personal ones, those you'll have to agree with your manager, your line manager. But regardless of whether or not you have issues with them or not, if you've documented and you've articulated exactly what the expectations are, and then you've documented that, hey, actually, I've done this or I've done that. You asked me to do this. The organization asked me to do this. Here it is. And then you can actually go in the system and just update it or keep your own sort of folder in your Outlook. And then just simply drag and drop that to once you do your mid-year write-ups on those things. But it's documenting everything you've done. And then regardless of what your dynamics are with your manager, because they know that goes to HR. What's formalized there goes to HR, and that's sort of their Bible. There's no way around that.
And that's maybe at a bulge bracket bank, right, where there's a little more formal systems where you have that. What about like a boutique or something like that, where it's kind of a little bit more free flowing? There's like 20
I still think you as long as you document things, and when you probably have more access to your line manager, and so you have more meetings. But as long as you can point back to things, even emails that you kept, or maybe you got good feedback from a stakeholder, or things like that. A lot of times we just we take those things for granted. But establishing those relationships with stakeholders, to Kasha's point, you can add so much more value in terms of your organizational reach and sort of the perception of others towards you. And then you can leverage that at the end of the year to get 360 feedback. And it really, it adds up. And by the end of the year, you'll have this like accumulation of like feedback and documentation. And it's just it's going to really make the process and less intimidating, the process of the performance here, because, you have hard facts behind you and actions taken.
Yeah, I feel like when they bring you into the room to tell you your bonus number, at that point it's already too late, right?
Yeah.
They've already decided the number. It's kind of like the month to that you need to be. I guess
you got to look at the long game.
Yeah. Well, what do you mean by that? What do you mean?
I mean, look, it's not just your first year; it's your second year. I mean, your track record in those HR portals are there. So people are if you want to move internally, they're going to look back at that and they're going to read that. So whether or not you got an X amount of dollars that you didn't get, it's actually your performance review that they're going to look. They're not going to see what your bonus was.
Yeah.
Right. But obviously that matters to you now. I get that. But in terms of the longer game and playing yourself for success down the road within the organization or externally, I think, yes, it hurts not to be able to get the bonus that you wanted, but you can do things to sort of mitigate that and have more longer term success.
So I had a question, something that I see a lot with our students inside Academy and Wall Street Oasis mentoring in general. Do you feel like, so we end up, sometimes there's students that start a little bit later in their undergrad. They're not like freshmen preparing for junior summer internships. They're maybe juniors or late sophomore year and they've missed the window. They end up going to, let's say, middle office or back office because they want to be in finance, but that's where they end up. You mentioned about transitioning internally. Is this something that obviously keeping track of that, doing a good job for your line managers and all that is important, but how do you navigate that internal transition, or is it easier just to jump firms in general? So for, let's say you're in, I don't know, like a trading support role, but you're trying to get more to the front office, to a prime brokerage or something along those lines. How would you go about navigating that? Because I know it can be politically very dangerous.
It can, but again, it's alliances. When you work in those support roles, you're going to have a lot of stakeholders. You're going to have those that you're essentially have a dotted line into. And if you can forge strong relationships with, one of the things I implore for those coming into the various seats is understand who your stakeholders are, spend some time with them, say, hey, go to your manager and be like, hey, can I spend some time with, these other teams that I'm supporting? And then their managers will see that and get a sense for what they do, appreciate what it is that their job functions are, learn. And then, like I said, over time, once you build those alliances, it's really easy to go to those people and be like, I'd love to work for you if I see an open role. Right. But hopefully you have a good relationship with your manager as well. And sometimes you don't, and that can be a sticky situation. So, but a lot of it is just politics, and it's really difficult on this call to kind of go through it. But one of the things that we teach at Wall Street EI is how to navigate the office politics and position yourself to be able to, without hesitation, try to transition into those types of roles where it may seem a little sticky, but there are definitely, really, I would say, I've been through so many of those transitions. If you just look at my resume, I've been through, constantly moving.
That's why I asked you. Yeah, that's why I asked you.
Yeah. So, but a lot of it was just political savviness and knowing how to leverage the relationships that I built, and it expanded my network over time. And that's why I'm able to help so many people now, because my network is still so wide in the industry, and I'm able to just refer them to various places.
When you would approach one of those transitions, like when you knew, hey, now is the time, or within the next few months, I want to make this leap or start kind of trying to position myself for that. Was it something where you had already laid the groundwork? You already had a few strong relationships in whatever group you were trying to get over to? Is that fair to say?
Well, I mean, you still have to. Here's the thing: you still have to have strong ratings to be able to move.
Right.
They're not going to let you move if you don't have a certain set of ratings. That's why the performance review is so important.
Yeah.
There's a certain logic in how we've sort of positioned ourselves here with what we're trying to do, is because for you to be able to move, you can't even move if you're considered meets expectations on Wall Street is average. But if you speak to the managers, they'll say, well, hey, you've done your job. I'm like, yes, Mr. Manager. However, you're not going to let me move to that next position because I haven't exceeded expectations. Because the person that wants to hire you wants to see someone who's exceeded expectations. Right. And that's where that's why it's so competitive for those roles. And that's why people get so frustrated, because they're blocked from so many of those roles because of their ratings, which again, it's so political, and there's so many things that we need to address in terms of the infrastructure and how performance reviews, all those things. But, it's a game, Patrick, and Kasha and I know this, and it's how you play that game, and all these things that we're just talking about now is, it's very challenging, but it can be done. And hopefully we can help towards those goals.
Is there anything the students and the young professionals can do to get more comfortable with speaking up? So when I say that, actually going and saying, when they say, hey, we're going to put you on this deal, because you've been doing such a great job and you've been working 90-hour weeks, and you're thinking to yourself, well, if I say no, that could be career limiting here. How do you get to the point knowing that you're near your breaking point, having a voice when you're only 6 months on the job? Is there anything you can do to prepare for that? Because I feel like that's where a lot of the burnout happens, is the good people don't ever want to seem weak. Right. And so how do you encourage them? Or is there anything that the actual people can do? I think you're trying to approach it from top down, saying, hey, we need better leadership to recognize these things so that this doesn't happen as often. But I think it's pretty inevitable in certain places within certain groups where the culture is pretty ingrained that this is the boot camp and I went through it, you're going to go through it.
I think it happened to me a few times, but what I would say is that when you get to the point where you are so good and, or they want to actually put more on your plate, then you have to ask yourself a question. If you're doing very well at this already high standard, if they add one more thing to your plate, you're going to suck at all of them. So is it worth it to actually you taking another project and actually underperforming, then saying, actually, no, there's no, I think, shortcut to saying no, but giving the reasons why you're saying no, rather than I don't want to take it because I don't want to take it. Look, I have already 3 or 4 projects and I think I'm doing very, very well. If I take this one more project, this project is not going to be delivered to the standard that I am accustomed to. And all my other projects will suffer, which means I'm actually going to get downgraded in eyes of everyone. So I think you're going to have more courage to say no if you know your overall performance is just going to go down. Yeah.
Yeah. It's an interesting perspective. Yeah. I think it's interesting after you've kind of, from what I felt, the first 6 months for myself where I was, very steep learning curve. it was probably one of the hardest times in my life where I had one bad associate kind of come over me and didn't really know how to teach me at all. Actually, I think he was very weak technically. And it was, for some reason, they placed him with me with the liberal arts, and actually had a VP take me under his wing, and actually teach me all the stuff I needed to know, like just a few times. And then like, that was it. And I was off to the races, and my skills started accelerating so that I was reliable. I was efficient. But that took somebody sitting me down and actually being like, this is how you do this. This is how you do that. And spending those few hours with me to get me up that curve. And so I think what's interesting to me is like, once that happened, and it was say like 6 months in, I'd been working 90, 100 hours a week. To me, you get to the point where it's like, you have that confidence now. And, you don't feel like you're disposable anymore. You feel like I can say no. Now I didn't do that because I felt almost like I didn't want to let down the VP or the MD, the people who kind of took me under the wings and did help me through that tough period. And so it did lead to somewhat of burnout, I think, for myself. But like, I'm curious, like mental, physical well-being, prioritizing that. Is there anything you'd advise? Because there's obviously a balance. Like, it's going to be longer hours than what a lot of students are used to, but it's also, if you do want to stay in banking long run, you have to kind of approach it with a more sustainable mindset of like, am I actually taking a vacation this year? Can I get away for a week? Can I unplug for 24 hours? Yeah.
I think for me, banking was so similar to playing professional tennis. And what it means is that when I play professional tennis, there was professional tennis. There was no parties. There was not friends. I had to make conscious decision where I want to focus on, and be very mindful of my recovery time. And, I wanted to have it all. And I wanted to have it all also in banking. I wanted to have amazing career, get paid well, be ranked high, go to all the parties, tell everyone I was in banking, but I had to say no to those things. Because if, I worked 3 a.m. for Monday to Friday, or, Friday, maybe you get off at 9, all you want to do is just go out, be your friends and have fun. And that fun maybe ends up at 2, 3 in the morning after, few drinks here and there. And then next thing, you go to sleep again at 3 with maybe after a couple of drinks, and you wake up, on Saturday to like 100 emails. So to me, it sucks. Yes. But you have to make this conscious decision. Like, okay, maybe you go out once a month and like, you maybe just use it, fully. But in my opinion, if you want to stay sharp, it's more like you're really dedicating your life for next 2 to 3 years and making conscious decision that this is the way it's supposed to be. And I have to be very mindful of, you're not being kind of tired physically because you're sitting, but mentally you are very tired and exhausted. So in that downtime, think about how can you recover and what brings you the most joy. And look, for some people it can be like, taking a massage, walk, run, exercise. For some it can be cleaning, or I don't know, cooking, or being with family. But I think that recovery is so small, but you need to be so conscious how you use it, because it will just accumulate on top of it. And to me, burnout, if you like what you do, you will never get burned out, but it's more like when you get to the point where your performance start going, if you used to be able to do this model within 45 minutes and now it's taking you 3 hours, this is where you get frustrated. This is when burnout happens. But it happens because mentally you're just not there, and you could be performing so much better, and it just accumulates on top of each other. So if I could, say anything to my younger self, it would be just, and even I'm guilty, because, I was professional tennis and I could say no to all those things when I was professional tennis. But in banking, I felt like it was just more tempting because, you had a little bit of money, you want to get out, you want to enjoy yourself. And it feels again like I was, kind of stuck in this job where I couldn't see the end and the green light in the end of the tunnel. So it is the mindset, but you have to ask yourself, what is more important right now?
Yeah, no, it's always a tough balance, I think, especially early on. I'd love to ask, Moise, anything to add on that?
No, I think it's just it's a personal choice in terms of what comes your way during and in those moments when you're feeling a certain way, it's to know when to step back. It's just being a little more introspective to know yourself and know when to step back and sort of, be honest with your management or whoever is sort of overseeing you. and do right by yourself. But those first couple 3 years, it does make an impression on how you handle adversity and pressure and stress, and that can make or break you in terms of how you're perceived within the organization. So to invest in yourself, in your mindset, and in developing, whether it's meditation, I know it sounds corny and all that, but in the morning, hey, Kobe Bryant did it every morning, right? He would wake up every morning at a certain time, and he'd visualize the day ahead, and he'd know that he'd face adversity, and he'd formulate in his mind how he would handle those moments when they come, and so so it's just a matter of preparing yourself a little bit.
Yeah, there needs to be a lot of, I want to talk a little bit about introspection, because I feel like in order to get to the point where you're actually meditating in the morning, actually visualizing your day, how you're going to respond, I think that takes a certain level of maturity and introspection that a lot of people, just kids coming out of school, don't necessarily have yet. They're still kids in a lot of ways. So I guess my question is more around like personality types. So sometimes you get the person who can do it all, right? They're gregarious, they're great, they're amazing at modeling, and it's just easy for them. But then you have a lot of people who maybe are just a little weaker technically, but maybe they're great with clients. Then you get people who are just really timid and nervous around clients, but they're really strong technically and are great still for the deal team and whatnot. What's your, for those different types of characteristics of people, what's your advice in terms of just helping them kind of get the most out of, their early careers?
For me, if I look back, if I wish I could do anything different, I would be looking internally much more or externally for mentors and support, because, and I don't think it has to be as official as knocking on the door, say, hey, can you be my mentor? Because that it becomes very just, no one wants to be your mentor. It becomes something much more natural.
Yeah.
So, but I think if you just try your best to surround yourself and almost sometimes force yourself into people's lives when, maybe you're scheduling some meetings, stopping by the office, and just kind of developing that network of people that will help you and lift you up and tell you what you don't know yet. Internally, obviously, is the best thing to go first. But then if you're not getting that internally, because, there are different places, some people are just, maybe you work in a small office and it's just, VP and MD, and you don't have anybody else to go to.
Yeah.
Then try to maybe speak to somebody externally. And look, it can be coach, or it can be, maybe some other friend. But I think feeling alone, or feeling like you are the only one facing that problem, I think it can be very, it's just very difficult, and anxiety kicks in, and you feel like, imposter. So seeking help in any way possible, I think it would just alleviate a lot of pressure and burden, and you're just not going to feel so alone and all that.
Yeah, and I think look, like to your point earlier, Patrick, sometimes when we come into the industry, we haven't matured fully, some more than others.
Yeah.
But it's almost like it's a self-awareness of, okay, where once you're sort of hit the ground running, you kind of see the landscape. Okay, here's where I fall short, or I don't feel comfortable in this situation. Oh my God, I got to give this presentation in front of these people, or you know yourself, where your weaknesses are, and it's incredible how actually in these organizations there are so many people who are doing so well for themselves and reach certain levels. They're so willing to give back to others. They really are. The way you were mentored, Patrick, in that VP, and the way you were able to accelerate, there's so many of those. It's just a matter of coming out of your comfort zone and actually reaching out to people that you think, hey, do you mind if I pick your brain a little bit? Could we sit down for half an hour? Because those people will appreciate that you actually were proactive, because you want to be better. And by you being better, you're going to make your organization better. So believe me, yes, I will say leadership is not as proactive as they can be in your instance, where that VP sort of saw that and helped you. You have to approach them. And where you're falling short, look for those people that are strong in those categories and reach out to them and say, hey, look, I'm a little uncomfortable in front of clients, or yes, I'm technically proficient, but can you coach me a little bit, train me a little bit? Obviously, that's what we're here for as well. We can certainly help in that regard too. But within the organization, there are resources, and it's just a matter of having the courage to actually ask for help.
For sure, I think it's really important. I think it's easy to say, it's very hard to do because it's intimidating for these kids, right? It's intimidating, and so I think having that introspection, having that bravery to do that early on, I think, and realizing that people will help. The vast majority of people want to help. Fast, especially if you go to them, you're humble and you explain to them where you feel like you're struggling.
Yes.
Showing a vulnerability. And I say the same thing when you're just networking with people. It's like, you don't have to try and show off and act like you know everything. It's actually more endearing and more you become more likable when you actually show that you recognize your deficiencies early on. So that's, I think, great advice.
And it's a segue into like, well, you know, we all have a reputation and a brand once you come in. People perceive you a certain way. Mm-hmm. And if you're perceived as someone who just, you know what, that person is short on certain skill sets, or let's not put them in front of a client.
Yeah.
You know, you want to be perceived that way, and that's your reputation, that'll stick with you. But if you actually proactively ask someone to say, hey, I acknowledge that this is sort of my shortcoming, help, just give me a couple sessions, give me some tips, put me in a simulated situation. Maybe we can work on that. You'll be better off.
So kind of before we wrap up here today, I'd love to just ask each of you, because you kind of touched on this. I wish I'd told my younger self this. If you could tell your younger self or the young people kind of joining Wall Street, whether they're about to start their summer internship or their full time, what kind of one piece of advice would you give them to kind of try and survive and thrive on Wall Street? And then you can plug your site as well.
For me, I think first, be proud of yourself, how far you've come. And I think this is just a new chapter in your life, and it's not meant to be easy. I think that's something that, I thought that, it's going to be easier, but actually it's the next chapter that will get you better. It will be hard. So expect that. But what I wish, I've taught myself is just surround myself with much more support around me. And whoever it is, it can come even, maybe from your family, your friends. But being sort of left alone in that struggle can be very difficult for you to, pass through those days where you stay in, 3, 4 in the morning and your friends are having, fun. And I don't know, your boyfriend, your girlfriend is just mad at you. So even during those times, if you can have someone to talk to, and to be honest with you, it doesn't change as you go up. That's the beauty about it. Like, don't think that the struggles go away. They just get harder and the problems can just get more elevated. Mm-hmm. And regardless, whether I've worked with analysts or head of the teams, everyone has their own struggles. And I think talking through them and, verbalizing them and just changing the perspective, I think it makes a huge difference. And it's the same in sports. Like, people, whether they start, you have the technical, you have all the sort of capabilities, especially if you got a job, like you're good, you know how to do it. Mm-hmm. Now you just have to learn how to play the game and keep pushing yourself. But, it's not meant to be easy, and you don't want it to get easy. You just want to get better at easy stuff and look back, let's say in 6 months' time, it's like, well, that first model was hard, but now I can do it really easily. So just take it as a challenge. And when it's hard, it means you're growing. So I think it's, again, just the perspective that you put on things that are hard. Hard builds you and makes you better and stronger and equals, better bonuses, better opportunities and stuff like that. Hopefully, not always, but, yes, your career is sort of long-term and the first 3 years are going to mean nothing when you are, my age, but they're equally very important because they can make you or break you. And I've seen so many people loving finance and wanting to be in finance, but there is this extra layer of difficulty, especially investment banking. You have long hours. And if you don't pass this first 3 years, like, you might just not do what you love for the rest of your life just because you were not, you were not able to sustain those first three years. So just prepare yourself. But by preparation, I mean, just surround yourself by right people, look after yourself, and think of yourself as an athlete who is performing. And this is something that you want to do for the rest of your life. Things will get easier over time. The hours will get shorter. The money will come. So it's I think it's just longer term view, taking it, but day by day, just keeping your head down and making sure you do everything you're supposed to do. Yeah,
it's great. Weiss, anything on your end?
Yeah, I think it's finding your why, finding your purpose earlier on. There's no reason why you can't find it earlier on. Your passions, that takes introspection.
Yeah.
Like, what is it that I love to do? What is it that I like to do? For me, it was leadership. Once I started realizing that I can impact those around me and elevate them, make them better versions of themselves, and it still is my passion, and so it took me a while to figure that out. I was always into psychology growing up. Like as a kid, I almost changed from finance to psychology, my major, and I wish I did, and I went down the path of the traditional finance route. But looking back on it, it's even while you're in school, it's like, what are the subjects that you're passionate about? Are you in finance because of money? I spoke at UPenn last semester, and in their finance club, and I asked everyone, there's about 100 people in the room, what are you motivated? Why do you want to get into the industry? And I said, is it money? And 95% I think 2 or 3 kids didn't raise their hand, and so, and I said to them, I was honest, I was like, if that's your motivation, I think that's the wrong motivation, and so you're going to find yourself over time in terms of what your passions are, but there's no reason why you can't start that earlier on. And I would have asked myself earlier on, Weiss, hey, go towards the direction that you feel most comfortable and that you like and that you love to do, because then work's not going to seem like work, right? Money will come and happiness is ultimately what we want, is happiness and self-fulfillment and all those things. And you can still have an incredible career on Wall Street, but it's just such a large landscape. There's so many things that you can do to fit your personality, that fit your temperament. And that's somewhere where we fall short because we're so attracted to the glamour of, a certain
group or certain firm. And
that's a very short-sighted view, but hey, a lot of people, unfortunately, they'll pay the price.
Yeah. Well, hopefully we can open people's eyes a little bit more about not only how to approach a career, but other kind of paths. And,
exactly.
Hopefully this podcast does a small part in terms of opening people's eyes of there's not one tried and true path. There's lots of different ways to success in life. And
absolutely.
I just want to thank both you, Kasia and Weiss, for joining today. Definitely check out their site, wallstreetei.com. You guys want to talk about a discount or something for the users? I know you guys are launching next week, or it's launching next week. By the time this goes live, it'll probably already be up. So do you want to mention anything on that?
Yes. So thank you very much for that. And again, thanks for having us on. It's really a privilege. We love your audience, and we're here to help. So wallstreetei.com, there's a discount code, wallstreet20. If you enter that in, it's a 20% discount for WSO listeners, subscribers, members. But yeah, we're here to help. So anything
we'll put that we'll put that in the show notes as well, so you guys can get it easily.
Great. Thanks
so much for joining. Really appreciate it, both of you.
Thank you, Patrick.
Thanks, Patrick.
Okay, bye.